Hey, what's going on, D&D community? This is going to be a special video today. I'm going to be commenting on a video that Matt Colville recently released on his page, which is covering players that may be problematic in your D&D game and how to identify them and what to do about them. He released this video. It's kind of a 20+ minute long stream of consciousness. It's chock full of great information, tips and suggestions for what to do from his perspective. My perspective's a little bit different, but I will be commenting on his points. If you're not familiar with Matt Colville, he is one of, I would probably suggest, three of the kind of D&D holy trinity figureheads of YouTube and content creators that are really prolific right now in the RPG community, along with Chris Perkins and Matthew Mercer, of course. I'm going to comment on all of this and more. Stick around, check out the YouTube channel to see all of my other free D&D content that I'm giving away. You, of course, are watching The Dungeon Geek. Hey, thank you for joining me. This is, of course, a commentary on the Matt Colville video, which I mentioned before. If you've not seen this video and you want to take some time to kind of thumb through it, the link is right here below inside the description. Feel free to check that out because I'm going to go ahead and recap right now my key takeaways, just sort of paraphrasing things that I drew from Matt's commentary on problematic players for D&D. And so of the key points that he kind of got across to me, one, regardless of whether there's one or more problem players at your table, the problem player is probably easily identified because he's not going to engage with the content that you're providing for them as a dungeon master. And if they do provide any sort of engagement, it's not making it fun for the other players. And that kind of brings you into this realm of being able to define what is a problem player. Well, it varies table to table, of course, as Matt has kind of mentioned. It doesn't matter what archetype they happen to be, whether they're, a tactician or a min-maxer or, a very theatrical type role-playing player. If a player is disrupting the fun of other players or you, the GM, they're being a problem player. It's as simple as that. So how do you deal with this? Well, as Matt suggests, and as I've witnessed in countless games, these problem players don't necessarily realize that they're being a problem. When the GM is being a problem player, the GM doesn't realize that he's being the problem player. So Matt's suggestion in this video is to adjudicate the problem at the table with all the other players present. So it's kind of like staging an intervention in that sense, okay? And he, of course, mentions that this should be done in a respectful way, a way that respects all the players at the game. After all, everyone is donating their time in order to play this collaborative game together, so everyone should be equally important. One of the things that Matt kind of gets across time and time again in the video is that there are different groups for all sorts of different players. So just because someone's being problematic in the group doesn't mean that they're a bad person or a bad player. Maybe they can just agree to disagree on how to have fun in the game, and they can come to terms with the fact that maybe this isn't the group for them. So as Matt describes, be open to the idea that there may not be a solution. You may not be able to find common ground, and a player or a GM may need to leave the game. And that's okay, because there are tons of other groups that they can try and find games to play in. One of the other things that Matt touches on very briefly at the end of the video is that if a group of players is able to play games together other than D&D, they're oftentimes going to have a better time when they play D&D together. I play a lot of games digitally. I don't sit around a table face-to-face with real people. It just doesn't fit my schedule. But of the people that I do play D&D with, some of the best group members that I've had as of recently are people that I've drawn in from other gaming communities, people that I play other games on the internet with, like first-person shooters or other RPGs from the past. These are people who, maybe you don't know them from Adam, but they'd be interested in playing D&D with you. So feel free to just, talk about your nerdy ass hobbies and invite them to come play with you. It could be a really good time. Matt talks about wanting to empower others, and the method which he describes it is actually pretty spot on in the way that I like to deal with things in my life in general. So I think it's bigger than D&D. It's determining how you don't want to do something. He's showing you his way of doing something. It may not be right for you. But by identifying that it's not the right way for you, then maybe you can say through a process of elimination that, you know what, I don't want to do things that way, but this would make sense for me. And then you've eliminated one method of doing things and exchange it for a better direction for you personally. And I can't agree with this more. There was a coaching speech, like a life coaching speech that I watched on YouTube by Matthew McConaughey. All right. And he gave out this information about knowing what it is that you want is a lot harder. It's a lot bigger of a question than knowing what it is that you don't want. Being motivated by negative things is a really easy way to get people to kind of sort themselves out. So bigger than D&D, but including D&D, a great way to audit negative things in your life or in your game is to see what you don't want and then not engage with that anymore. And there's a chance that you can make your game and your life at large a lot better. Another thing that Matt touches on in the video is that he receives comments from Twitter, and multiple times he's received messages that say, my whole group doesn't want to engage in my content. And he kind of suggests, not really, but kind of insinuates that perhaps the whole table is problem players. Maybe. Maybe. That's fair. Maybe. But maybe the problem isn't the group of players, because after all, in that situation, the one common denominator that all the players have is that they are playing in your game. So perhaps as the GM, you might want to take a look inside and figure out, well, is it something that I'm doing? And regardless of who's at fault of being the problem player, whether it's a PC or a GM, it's a tough pill to swallow. I can't stress this enough. Don't be too hard on yourself. Don't be too hard on your players, all right? Sometimes the problem that they're having is not necessarily a reflection of them as a person, but just in how they find enjoyment in the game. If players are not enjoying the adventure that you're running, it could just be the adventure you're running. Switch to some homebrew, or switch to an AP that's highly rated, or focus on the activities that the players like doing while they're playing the game. Maybe there's too much RP and they want combat. Maybe there's too much overland survival and they want more political intrigue. Oftentimes, it's much more nuanced than that, because the wants and desires of each individual player is going to vary all the way down to the individual. So as the DM, you've kind of shouldered this responsibility to cater to each of the players' playstyles, or at least to some of their gaming needs. So you could, before you run the adventure, ask the players what it is that they'd like to do or accomplish, or what kind of a game they would like to play, if you're open to catering to their needs like that. Alternatively, if you've got a post online and you're running a game digitally through like Roll20, you could make sure that the description of the game that you want to run tells the players exactly what to expect. And then that way you can kind of say, well, this is kind of what you signed up for, and they can bail on their own accord, and we can avoid some drama. A lot of the times, the screening process that you go through in a digital game is a lot more thorough than you can at your local game store, or if Bob and Cindy bring a couple of their cousins over to play D&D one weekend. Another good tactic is when you're watching the players play the game, pay attention to what they engage with. If a player is interested in a specific type of content, they will engage with it. You will be able to see or hear them get excited whenever this content becomes around. Maybe it's shopping for magical items. Maybe it's talking to the old wizard in the mill. I don't know. But when you see that they like it, make a note. This player likes this. And then maybe try and add a little bit more of that to them, or a nod to them every game or two, just to keep them feeling rewarded. In the video, Matt talks a little bit about how to handle disruptive players, and he had talked about wanting to sort of adjudicate at the table in front of everyone else. He mentioned specifically the dungeon masters should have an air of authority to themselves, assertiveness, whatever you want to call it. So they basically are the ones in charge. And I feel like this is also very important to deal with on the front end of getting your group together and letting them know what to expect. And in real time, when the game's being played, being able to nip in the bud behavior that is disruptive and negative to the game at large, or just toxic things that some players do, because as we all know, this hobby does attract some people that are not as socially well versed as others. That's okay. It's great to have them get out and be social, and D&D is a great resource and a great exercise to help people deal with their social anxieties or other sort of kind of social or behavioral issues that maybe they're dealing with on a personal level. And it's not up to us to punish people for behaving this way if it's just part of their nature. Treat everyone as well as you can, and be as respectful as possible when dealing with problems. Dealing with confrontations is a huge topic. Handling it the wrong way with the wrong person can have big social and emotional backlashes depending on who and how you're handling it. As Matt points out, there are groups out there that can handle any type of player. They just have to find them. Even groups for his signature pseudonym, Wangrods.
Wangrods.
It's pretty evident that what is problematic in one group may be business as usual in another. I personally used to hate how much Pathfinder characters were just completely min-maxed. It felt like any Pathfinder character that I ever ran across was just super min-maxed. I hate power gaming. I can't stand it. I don't know why players get enjoyment out of it. And it really took me a long time to get over my resentment of that as a dungeon master. And now I'm really willing to accept it. Eventually, I realized that I really don't have any right to squash the fun that someone else gets out of the game, regardless of how they do it or how different it is than I perceive the fun of the hobby to be. Be willing to have respectful negotiations to figure out if there is a way to reach common ground with the player that you're having a problem with. And also be willing to accept that perhaps the problem's you, the GM, or the content you're running, or the frequency at which you're participating in various activities, be it combat or whatever, as I had mentioned before. When it comes to dealing with players on a one-to-one or at the table, that's really going to require the GM to determine, well, can this person handle it? And is it best to do this in private or in public? In public could be really embarrassing. Uh, Ultimately, though, it could be very effective. If you really think that this relationship with this player can be reconciled in some way, have the conversation. But also don't feel bad if in your heart you really feel like this is unreconcilable and the player just needs to move on from the game, or you need to move on from the group. It's okay, there will always be another table to play at. I want to finish here by segueing into an experience that I had as a GM. We were doing a session 1 in a homebrew game that was several months back, and I thought that this game had run really smoothly until after it was finished, and one of the players got a hold of me via Discord. There was, according to him, a problem with the content of my game, and in this instance, I was on the receiving end of being the problem player in the conversation. Now, for context, this homebrew game world was centered on a very law-oriented city-state that had strict rules which govern the people. And so breaking any one of the big 10 cardinal laws would result in immediate exile into the wildlands beyond the city limits. So the PCs in session 1, they were hired as lawmen to escort generic exiles out beyond the city limits to receive a bounty. This was the seed of the opening adventure. Then, naturally, the group, when the game started, wanted to know more about each one of the prisoners. I'd not considered who they were up to this point, so I rolled on some tables and I gave each of them a name and a description and a crime for which they were being exiled. Here's where the problem occurred. One of the prisoners I rolled was an adulterous crone woman, a lady of the night, a member of the world's oldest profession. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you know what I mean. Now, I thought nothing of this, and the adventure went on. The group went into the wilderness, they fought some gnoll bandits, they discovered some sort of elemental idol and the crash of a meteorite that landed in front of them, and eventually, after they escorted the exiles, they returned and collected their bounties. The game was over, and then the player contacted me, and he started petitioning me to change my game world or the way that I was running the game, and was very hung up on this prostitute NPC. In his own words, having a 4-hour session revolve completely around a WHORE really makes the group uncomfortable, and you shouldn't do anything like that ever again. I was shocked and confused. I talked to him more about it, and we tried to, unpack the situation, but it was evident to me that he played in a completely different game than the one that I ran, or at least I felt that way. Now, it's fine that he had his own opinions about the game. Selective perception is a real thing, and wherever you focus your attention really determines how it is that you consume content. But I personally felt like the laws of this fantasy city were very important to the overarching story, even if he wasn't able to see it in the narrow scope of the single adventure that his character had been on. And so I told him that I wasn't going to change the game and that I didn't feel like what had happened was a big deal. And he left the game. That was one way that the situation could have been resolved among many. There were lots of other ways, and I'm sure it wasn't the only right way for it to end. But I'm curious, what would you have done in a situation like this, or what other sort of problem situations have you run into? Please message me or leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts or experiences in similar situations. Hey, thank you so much for watching today. Hopefully some of this banter that I've been spouting off helps you in some way. Please subscribe to Matt Colville's channel. It's a great channel. Subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more content like this. Hit that thumbs up button. Until next time, you've been watching The Dungeon Geek.